everything in the culture. The food we eat, the clothing we wear, the language we use, the way gender norms are portrayed, the political parties are elected or selected is through propaganda. Now we hear that term being thrown around loosely, so often that it becomes a platitude. But first, before I dissect what propaganda is, we should define it. The term propaganda is information, especially of a biased or misleading nature, used to promote or publicize a particular political cause or point of view. Now, the term propaganda first came into common use in Europe as a result of the missionary activities of the Catholic Church. In 1622, Pope Gregory created in Rome the Congregation for the Propagation of the Faith. The modern propaganda that is used around us today in many forms in the media, television, social media, music, movies, etc., was really stoked by Edward Bernays. Let me read you an excerpt from Edward Bernays' book. This book is called Propaganda. It was written in the year 1928. I will read you a few paragraphs, then I will tell you about the background of Mr. Bernays and his contributions to modern propaganda and public relations. Chapter 1 of the book is called Organizing Chaos. The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. We are governed, our minds molded, our tastes formed, our ideas suggested, largely by man we have never heard of. This is a logical result of the way in which our democratic society is organized. Vast numbers of human beings must cooperate in this manner if they are to live together as a smoothly functioning society. Our invisible governors are in many cases unaware of the identity of their fellow members in the inner cabinet. They govern us by their qualities of natural leadership, their ability to supply needed ideas, and by their key position in the social structure. Whatever attitude one chooses toward this condition, it remains a fact that in almost every act of our daily lives, whether in the sphere of politics or business, in our social conduct or our ethical thinking, we are dominated by the relatively small number of persons, a trifling faction of our 120 million, who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses. It is they who pull the wires which control the public mind, who harness old social forces and contrive new ways to bind and guide the world. It is not usually realized how necessary these invisible governors are to the ordinary functioning of our group life. In theory, every citizen may vote for whom he pleases. Our Constitution does not envisage political parties as part of the mechanisms of government, and its framers seem not to have pictured to themselves the existence in our national politics of anything like the modern political machine. But the American voters soon found that without organization and direction, their individual votes, cast perhaps for dozens of hundreds of candidates, would produce nothing but confusion. Invisible government, in the shape of rudimentary political parties, arose almost overnight. Ever since then, we have agreed, for the sake of simplicity and practicality, that party machines should narrow down the field of choice to 2 candidates, or at most 3 or 4. This book is called Propaganda. It is by Edward Bernays. I got it for about $13. This is about 4 or 5 years ago. I just thought it was very apropos to come back to this, based upon what we are seeing with COVID-19, the riots, and the media. Edward Bernays was the nephew of Sigmund Freud, the father of modern psychology. Edward Bernays, at that time, he grew up in the early 1900s. Children were seen and not heard. At the table, he would listen very vigorously to Sigmund talk about psychology. He became fascinated by it. He was denied service in World War I, but he was on the board of propaganda for the war, for World War I. After the war, he began many famous public relation campaigns. Before that, one of the things he did was President Coolidge, Calvin Coolidge, who was seen as a stern and humorous character. Bernays arranged for performers of the day, and these were more Broadway singers, jazz musicians, people like that, like A.J. Jolson, to visit Coolidge at the White House, who was portrayed in the press as having fun. And then in 1924, he won re-election. Of course, Bernays took credit. In the 1920s, he worked for the American Tobacco Company. During the Easter parade, women were seeking freedom. So Bernays organized a group of women to march carrying cigarettes. The next day in the New York Times, they had an article about the annual Easter celebration. On a subheadline, on the front page, they read, "Group of girls puff at cigarettes as gesture of freedom." When they were interviewed, the women said the cigarettes were, quote, torches of freedom that were lighting the way to the day when women would smoke on the street as casually as men. Sales with women accelerated. We all know the traditional breakfast of bacon and eggs, but where did it originate? There was a company called Beech Nut Packing Company, which at that time was the country's biggest bacon producer. Its sales were dwindling, so the company called Bernays. Bernays hired a well-known New York physician who surveyed doctors. The doctors published a survey that confirmed, quote, a heavy breakfast was scientifically desirable. Beech nut sales boomed and a classic breakfast was born. Bernays did many notable things. We won't get into them all today. If you want to hear more, just get his book Propaganda. The last notable contribution, if you want to refer to it as that, was he helped turn John D. Rockefeller from the greatest criminal on earth to a grandfatherly, philanthropic old man. It's kind of comical now, but this was new technology for the time. You can go on YouTube and see clips of John D. Rockefeller giving nickels to the children. He's like, I'm gonna give the nickels to the children. He's singing in the choir, he's playing golf. He really tried to redo his image to look like this philanthropic old man. That's kind of like Bill Gates. Back in the 90s, he was going to the Supreme Court, rocking back and forth against Apple. Now he's trying to look like this nice philanthropic old man. And that is similar to what John D. Rockefeller did. Now, in the book, Bernays admits all this stuff, and there's even interviews on YouTube you can find. He's very old. This is like in the 90s, so he's very old at the time. But you can tell he's proud of his achievements, and he even thinks it's necessary. As I stated in the book, he thinks it is necessary in a democracy. Those are his words, not mine. Now, how does public relations, social engineering, propaganda, whatever phrase you want to use, affect us? Well, one of the ways you can see is the culture. Think about TV shows, for instance. If you look at very old shows like Leave It to Beaver, The Brady Bunch, and The Cosby Show, the father is the man of the house. The father will not let his kids say shut up to him. The father is the man of the house. It doesn't mean he doesn't help out. I mean, in The Cosby Show, Cliff cooks plenty of times, but he makes sure his kids have good report cards. He's the man in the home. Same thing with Cleaver and Leave It to Beaver and The Brady Bunch. But in modern shows, just one for instance, I have not watched modern TV in years on a regular basis other than sports or selective news programs. But there was this one show that was on maybe about 10 years ago called Good Luck Charlie. The dad in the show was a bumbling idiot. The kids would tell him to shut up. They had no respect for him. Nothing. I remember on one particular episode, he was yelling for his daughter, and she said, "What do you want?" The dad bumbled down the stairs like a moron, dropped the baby in the air, and one of the kids caught it. And he's like, "Don't tell mom about this." When kids see that, they see that the father is a bumbling moron. And that's what they're portraying in modern TV. The man is dumb, the man is stupid, the man can't wipe his own ass, the man's a moron. In the older shows, the man had it together, the parents would not let their kids smart off to them. Could you imagine Beaver telling Cleaver to shut up? He would have been killed. Or could you imagine Opie telling Andy Griffith no? He would have been punished from Kingdom Come. But yet, these kids on these new shows are telling their parents to shut up. The kids see that behavior, they see it as acceptable, and they are engineered subconsciously to act in that manner. But it's a lot bigger than TV. You have music. There was a study from Andrew Pell Morse where he revealed that the lyrics of number one singles averaged a third grade reading level. He analyzed the reading levels for 225 songs that spent 3 or more weeks atop Billboard pop, country, rock, and hip hop charts. You see people talking like that too in the regular world. They're like, "What's up, bro? What's up, dog?" It's because they hear it in the music and they mimic that music. You ever had a song stuck in your head? I'm sure all of you have. When you have a song stuck in your head, that song is ingrained in your subconscious mind. Your brain remembers it. That's what memorization is. What happens is you regurgitate those lyrics that are dumb. Like, think about it, nene. What the hell is a nene? What is a nene? Like, what does it mean? Watch me whip, watch me nene, watch me. Like, how stupid is that, right? How moronic. How stupid, right? But people were doing it because it was considered cool. Because it was considered the trendy thing to do. They would talk in that manner. In the 90s, you had gangster rap, where these Rappers would talk about selling drugs. They would talk about killing police officers. There's a song by Snoop Dogg called 187 on an Undercover Cop. It's him and Dr. Dre. 187 on an undercover cop. It talks about killing an undercover cop. Tons of music like that. People would listen to that music. They would think it's cool and acceptable and mimic that behavior. Why is it music is not about empowering things? Why is it abnormal to make music about being a good citizen, being a good worker for the Lord? Why is that unique? But saying, yo, dog, I'm going to sell some drugs today, my G. Like, why is that considered normal? You sound stupid. Selling drugs could get you caught and put into prison. I mean, I personally, let me just preface myself. I might sound old fashioned. I personally think drugs should be decriminalized. Even though I don't use them, I think it's not the state's job to regulate them. But it is a law. If you get caught selling drugs, a large amount, you're going to end up in jail. Why would you brag about something that would put you into prison? That would cost you money, time, and possibly the right to vote and the right to work. Because a lot of places are going to do background checks. And you know what? You won't get hired because you were a G. You were cool. You were a gangster because of Snoop Dogg or Dre or whoever there is now. Now, most notably, you have the news media. What's funny is a lot of these terms, like media, come from Greek, Hellenistic, and Latin origins. Like the word media comes from the word medium. Like they're going, you turn on the channel to hear the medium. There was a bill that was called the 1996 Telecommunications Act. Bill Clinton signed it, but Newt Gingrich, who was the Speaker of the House at the time, the Republicans controlled it, was also enthusiastic. This was a bipartisan thing. Under the guise of deregulation, under the guise of letting companies expand more into new technology, and this was mostly when you had broadband on the internet. This was the archaic, early, wild west days of the internet, when companies like Cisco and others were popular. I have a video that's more in depth about this if you want to watch it. I'm just going to surmise it here. I'm going to be concise. But basically, they deregulated the telecommunications industry. Before that, you had many local companies that owned media. It was illegal for a certain company to own such a large part of the media, to own too many things in the media. Something to that extent. It's been a while since I've looked into this. But basically, what you had were large companies buy off the smaller companies. And now you have 6 companies that control 90+% of the media. You have AT&T, who owns CNN. They own also Atlantic Records, which owns Cardi B and Bruno Mars. You have News Corp, who owns Fox News. Comcast owns NBC. National Amusements owns CBS. You have Sony, who's rising. And you have Disney, who owns your soul. Kidding. They own Marvel. They own ABC News. They own ESPN. It's not just that they own the news programs and the TV programs, but the movie studios, Touchstone Pictures, the record companies, Interscope Records, which has Ice Cube on there, talking about grab a bully by the pulley, whatever the hell that means, I don't even know, or being a gangster and fighting the police, is owned by Comcast. So these record companies, these television studios, all of this, and I have this in more detail on other videos on my channel, are all owned by 6 corporations. This is a question I asked a few years ago, because it seems to me that everybody from Jimmy Kimmel to Bruno Mars to ABC News, they all think the same way. When they hear a speech from Trump, they all think the same way. They all perceive it the same way. Why is that? I asked a pretty decent question. This was a question I asked on Facebook in 2018, I think it was. It's a question and a few statements. I said, if you're telling me that there isn't a concerted effort by public relations, the media, and corporations to control the minds of the public, you're telling me that completely so-called separate entities can all come to the same conclusions using their own thought processes. Is that not a conspiracy theory within itself? My basic premise is that I have friends who we agree 95% of the time about current events, about historical events, about scientific studies, things like that. But we don't not talk to each other. We don't, because conspiring is just two or more people who are talking about something to commit a crime. It's like in prison, not in prison, but in court rather, when you get conspiracy to commit a crime. You conspired with another person to do something, and that is illegal. That's all conspiracy means. Yet the term's been twisted from the CIA during the Kennedy assassination. Another story for another day. But basically, if you have a friend like I do that you agree 99.999% of the time, you're not going to have the same thoughts, the same conclusions, the same ideas on every single topic. You're going to disagree sometimes. Why is it that John Legend and Jimmy Kimmel and Ellen DeGeneres and National Public Radio, why is it that all of those entities, they agree on everything? They have the same adjectives. They agree on every single thing. I'll give you an example, and this isn't even to say whether it was good or bad, but after Trump had his speech at the RNC during the 2016 election, there was a guy who was really famous in public relations today. His name is Robert Cialdini. I personally like him and think he's a smart guy, even though I disagree with him politically. He has a book called Persuasion and Persuasion. It's a very interesting read about the mind. He worked for the Hillary Clinton campaign. Originally, he worked for Bernie. He said that Trump's speech was dark, which I think was a very shrewd thing to say. Then ABC News, CNN, everybody else regurgitated that. I'll give Cialdini credit for coming up with the thought originally. He's a smart guy. But then you had ABC and CNN just regurgitate that brainlessly. And then you had a typical person that watches the news regurgitate that. And then it passes around. You see, the ideas don't originate with the media or the celebrities. They originate with a certain person working for public relations, like Robert Cialdini, Edward Bernays. And then they trickle down to the news media, then they trickle down to the public dialogue and the public discussion. People just regurgitate what they see rather than forming independent thoughts and ideas. Another way they do it is through social media. Your mind is not meant to change lanes so quickly. You have grandma's cooking on one picture, then you have a political post, then you have a funny video. You're just changing lanes. It ruins your focus. Your brain is not able to focus on one thing at a time. But also, when you see something that makes you angry, which a lot of people do on social media, it puts your brain into fight or flight mode. You get really angry. You see, during the hunter-gatherer days, we had to run away from animals. Our brain doesn't know the difference between a real threat and a perceived threat. When you see riots in the streets, or you see, let's say that you hate the president and you see his speech and it makes you angry, then your brain goes into fight or flight mode, which increases your heart rate, which stretches the caps on your DNA, which causes you to age badly. But the goal of social media is to sell advertisements. They want you to spend as much time possible on their site. Say you like the Chicago Bulls basketball. Well, if you don't interact on a post, they're going to say, here's a post you missed. Update. Chicago Bulls post you missed. They want you to interact as often as possible. The more time you spend on that platform, the more they know about you, the more data advertisers have, and the more they can sell you, and the more the company can profit. In conclusion, these things are stored in your subconscious mind. As I stated, when you have a song stuck in your head and you repeat it, then those lyrics, instruments, are stored in your brain subconsciously. That's what happens. Everything you consume throughout the day, the music, the conversations, the media in any form, movies, television, whatever, your mind is going to remember that. And then there's a term called neuroplasticity, meaning that the more you do something or think on something, the stronger your neurons form. That's why when it comes to, for instance, shooting basketball, the more you shoot, the better you get because your muscles and your brain have more memory. Your brain reacts more. It's the same to negative ideas and positive ideas. If you constantly spend time on social media being angry, unhinged, and offended, your brain is going to produce more cortisol, which is the stress hormone. It's just not good for you. Later on, I might make a video on how to escape this partially. You can't escape it fully, but you can escape it partially.